So we're going to talk about goals. This is a very influential book in the world of design called The Design of Everyday Things. It's by Don Norman. Remember, Don Norman is the Santa Claus of design. And this is a nice little illustration of Don Norman that I thought was kind of nice. We are going to look into a few interesting aspects of the human mind. And why do you think we need to know about the human mind as user experience designers? Yeah. Yeah, to understand their expectations. That's good. What else do you think? Right. Yeah, that's absolutely right. All of these are right. Basically, the general point here is that we are designing things to be used by people. And so understanding people will help us to design things that are not as difficult to understand, not as difficult to use. Okay, without that understanding, it's unlikely that we're going to create things that are going to be really good for people. So this is a very basic model. So we're going to talk about how people sort of interact with the world. One way that we interact with the world is through our sensory system. So this includes our sight, our hearing, taste, smell, touch, those sorts of things. And then we have motor systems in which we affect things in the world. And we use our hands and legs to manipulate things, to kick things, to interact with digital tools and so forth. Okay, so this is kind of a basic model here. When we say world here, it's kind of an abstraction. We could be referring to anything. Of course, in this class, we're talking about building tools that people are going to be interacting with in the world. But it really could be digital or physical or anything like that. So let's take a closer look. And when we're talking about people, one important aspect that we've been talking about all semester is that they have some goals. These goals can be conscious or, for lack of a better term, subconscious. And when we have goals, we are interacting with things in the world, and we want to understand, well, what is the current state of this thing that I'm interacting with? Okay? So in terms of apps, for example, you want to understand what the current state is, and you want to know, what just happened with this thing that I just interacted with. Or users may wonder, is this what I wanted? Okay, and that all relates to what their goals are. We say that when a user understands the state of a system, that they have correctly evaluated that system. And the gulf of evaluation represents the difficulty of how difficult it is to understand that system. The more difficult it is to understand, we say the bigger the gulf. Okay, so just to understand that a little bit more, when we're talking about the gulf of evaluation, we're talking about the amount of effort a user needs to understand a system, and to determine how well the expectations and intentions have been met for that user. Okay, so here's just a simple example. So determining whether a certain button state is on or off, for example, that is an example of the gulf evaluation. This appears to be not much of a gulf at all because it's easy for most people to know which state is on or off, but for some users it may not be clear. Yeah?
Well, I've seen toggles like that where they don't change the color, and then it's really hard to tell which direction is on or off. That's really helpful.
Yeah, that would be very frustrating, especially if they don't have explicit labels. But here, we've talked about how color can be used to communicate. Here, color is used to indicate the certain state of the system. But if you don't use labels, someone that's colorblind would also struggle with that. Yeah? So when we spoke about triggers, we spoke about 3 components of a trigger. Who remembers what those 3 components are?
So it's the control itself, its states, and any labels that come with it.
Right. So in this case, adding control states is a way to help the users bridge the gulf of evaluation, help them understand the state of the system by using those control states. So when the gulf is small when the system provides information about its state. It's clear to understand its state, and it's easy to interpret, and it kind of matches the way that the person thinks of the system. So that's the gulf of evaluation. There's also this question that users will have about how they can use the system. Okay? The users want to know, how does it work? What can I do with it? Does what this can do match my goals? And things like that. Okay, so how do I use the system? So we talk about the gulf of execution when we're talking about how difficult it may be for someone to actually use the system. So the goal of execution is just the gap between a user's goals for action and the means to execute that goal. Okay? So just as an example here, if a user wants to set up a projector and maybe they have an expectation of how simple that will be, if that expectation is broken and it's a lot more difficult to set up that projector, and there's a lot more steps, then there's a gulf of execution, right? Because there's one expectation of how to use it, but that expectation didn't match the reality of it. Okay, so we say there's a gulf. So successful execution, in terms of interacting with some sort of system, really depends on successful evaluation. If you can correctly evaluate the state of a system, it usually will help you understand how to interact with the system and bridge that gulf of execution. The gulf of evaluation is about interpreting the system, whether that system is some digital device or even a physical device or just something in our environment. And the gulf of execution relates to doing something with the system. Okay? And as designers, understanding these gulfs will help you to bridge those gulfs. Okay? In order to bridge those gulfs, you first need to understand what the goal is, what the user is ultimately trying to do. And so what are some tools that we've been talking about to help you understand what the goal is, what the user's goal is? Okay, usability tests aren't the best way to understand goals, although it can help. Yeah.
Do some
Interviews, absolutely, that's one. And then another one is? Yeah, observation. Interviews and observation. And one of the methods of observation that we talked about last time was contextual inquiry. Okay? So those are the best ways to really understand what people's goals are. And then usability testing, when we're doing usability testing, what we're finding is how big the gulfs are, really. We can understand, like, what are they struggling to accomplish, and we can understand better what are they struggling to understand about the system. So usability testing helps us more here, and then observation and interviews help us more here. So both of them are really important and valuable to helping users interact with these tools and designing tools that will be usable and useful.